Hey everyone, I'm playing a slightly rather standard actually, Temujin wizard list. So let's go through some of the game decisions. I keep my opening hand because it's Temujin. That seems like a pretty weak reason for keeping, but well, Temujin is a really strong card, and against HB, you can pretty much expect them to ice up all three centrals by turn 2. So what I really want to do is to get the early Archives Temujin going, and especially when I have Dirty Laundry in my opening hand, this allows me to shoot up to 16 credits at the end of turn 1 instead of 13. So this is a huge credit lead, and it's very important because this means I can easily threaten to install anything from my hand at short notice and break through my opponent's ice. So let's hyperdraw here. We have a lot of good stuff. Ice Carver's an especially important card for this matchup. I'll be looking to install that in good time, although I do have to keep in mind that my opponent might be playing Foxfire, which is always a nasty thing to face against. My opponent resists a Bastion. I checked the remote because it could be an early rushing of agenda or something important generally. Turns out it's just a boot camp, which I can easily trash with wizard credits, therefore forcing my opponent to use it to tutor the Adonis. Now, I did manage to install the paperclip from my bin and pay 3 to install the Bastion only because I had the early start with Temujin. So now you notice that quickly sapped all my credits. I'm back down to 5 credits. I need to run Archives to trigger Temujin to give me money. But I slam head first into a Fairchild 3. So this is why you run first click. If you're afraid of Fairchild 3, you need to run first click. And speaking of Fairchild 3, with the latest cycle, all core factions have gotten strong code gates such that you have to mentally prepare for the worst case scenario when you hit an Archangel, a Mausolus, a DNA Tracker. In fact, HB actually is the least of the 4 poisons because the only really painful code gate is Fairchild 3, and you can simply run on your first click to mitigate the face check punishment. Now here, I intend to contest the remote, which contains my opponent's Adonis. He's only on 4 credits, so I don't have to worry about Fairchild 3. The worst that could hit me at this point is Architect, so I feel that's an acceptable risk, which is why I run HQ first, and then go swing over the remote. Really? Of all things, can't you just play your Infection Architect? No, you have to play Snack. So I got hit by the Snack, I lost my paperclip, I got my York sniped from hand by the net damage. The good news is I still have my clone chip, and paperclip installs from bin. So if I really wanted to, I can go through the server to trash the Adonis, but I decided no, it's not worth it. Firstly, my opponent cannot res the Adonis this turn. In fact, they probably can't res it next turn either. The Adonis will be sitting there in the remote for 2 whole turns, and there's nothing my opponent can do about it. So that's actually somewhat poor planning on my opponent's part. The fact that they leave themselves without enough money to res their Adonis for 2 whole turns actually means that I can afford to not check the remote. So while my opponent recovers, I drew first click into a Temujin, and looking at my opponent, they only have 3 credits. It only makes sense to redirect the Temujin elsewhere and begin slamming. In this case, HQ, because my opponent hasn't scored any agendas, drew quite a few cards from the deck. There should be a couple of agendas in hand. I got an ABT from it earlier, but all I see is a Shattered Remains. Interesting, and a hedge fund. So it's more of a trappy deck, huh? I gotta be careful. I drop into my other York as well as the Mimic. The Mimic was much welcome. I'm quite afraid to run R&D, but with the Mimic I can more safely do so. So that's the first thing I immediately dump on the table. I don't really want to install the Mimic because it telegraphs the fact that I have a solution to the Snack on the remote. But hey, I do need to contest the Adonis at some point, so if my opponent doesn't ice it here, I'm going to go for the Adonis. It only makes sense to deny the economy. And nope, they do not do anything about it, so I'm almost certainly going to run the Adonis here. But first run HQ. Oh, it's another Fairchild 3. Okay, I'll click through it, I'll access. What the f? I mean, seriously, who the f plays? Whatever. That's so core set. Anyway, the only solace from that is that the snare actually hit my iPad worse, because the worst news is my second York is in the bin. I'm staring at my bin right now. I'm hoping an Arc Lockdown doesn't come out, because Arc Lockdown would be perfect in this deck, but thankfully not. Nothing much happened. Instead, my opponent plays best defense on clone freaking chip. I could have clone chipped my York. I chose not to. I took the risk and I lost my clone chip. Whew! I don't know what deck idea this guy has, but it's working pretty well, I must say. What is my backup? Now I need to try to find my York recursion as quickly as I can. That's the only way I'm going to get through these Fairchilds, and all I have left in my deck is a Deja Vu and a Retrieval Run, so I need to start digging for that. And that's a very prime example of knowing what you need to achieve during a game, the number of outs you have in your deck to achieve that, and then executing the draws that you need to get there. That being said, however, you notice that I'm not tunnel visioning myself into just drawing cards. I need to keep the pressure on my opponent, and that means sticking to my plan of getting rid of the Adonis and killing a snack while I'm at it with a Parasite. Turns out Parasite is really efficient in tandem with Ice Carver on Strength 1 Ice. Really need to punish my opponent for their insolent ways, and well, they quickly stand back up on their 2 feet by placing a new piece of ice on top of the Bastion. I have to go for it here. So I click through the third Fairchild 3, paid through the Bastion. Notice that it only cost me 2 for the Bastion instead of 3 because I have an Ice Carver out. That Ice Carver is really doing a lot of work right here, saving me credits. And all I get is a Jackson, but hey, at least my opponent is not hyper drawing with Jackson. I'm happy to spend my turn clearing that Jackson. But now that I'm on 5 credits, I can't actually keep playing this remote shell game. If I were to run this remote, I would go down to 3 credits, which will leave me with insufficient credits to play Gamble. So I cannot run the remote this time. It's not a case of whether I think that item in the remote is an agenda or not. It's more of evaluating that in the context of what I have in my hand. Given that I've gambled in daily cards, it only made sense for me to play them and work it from there. So since my opponent spent most of their money scoring the Vitruvius, that's fine. We trade blows. You get the Vitruvius, I get the medium. I have 1 medium counter, they're forced to re-ice R&D. I saw an Enigma on top of R&D on the medium run, so I'm pretty confident that the ice that my opponent just put there is an Enigma. So what I want to do right here is to force the Enigma res without suffering the face check penalty of 1 click. My opponent being on 5 credits only means that they cannot res some of the more nasty ice, so I am rather confident in running R&D, knowing that I probably won't get hit by anything too nasty. And sure enough, that was the Enigma I expected. So now that every single server has a code gear on them, it's time for me to tone down my pressure. After running HQ here just to farm up a sucker token, I now need to lay back and find my Yogg. It's actually not that hard. I can play Deja Vu to retrieve the Yogg, but is that optimal? I think to myself, I really need to save the Deja Vu here. If my opponent plays Foxfire, and quite a few HB players are doing that nowadays, it's the smart thing to do, I need to be able to recur for Ice Carver with Deja Vu. So I'd rather use Retrieval Run on the Yogg as opposed to the Deja Vu. I'd rather save the Deja Vu in my hand for some emergency situations. I do not have that much recursion in my deck. So now my opponent plays a Naked Remote and I will obviously go for it, but after that I'll keep drawing up to find the Retrieval Run that I so badly need. Whoa, steady there, son of a don't you No! You f***ing piece of shit. Who the f*** plays Psychic Field in f***ing HB? Seriously? Oh my f***ing goodness. Ah! Well, I just got cheesed real bad, huh? What the hell? I lost my Deja Vu. Could have used that to get my Yogg. Could have used that to get my Ice Carver. No. I lost 5 cards. Lost my Deja Vu. I'm now digging frantically for the Retrieval Run. As I said, I need to find the Retrieval Run before my opponent ices archives and completely locks me out of any chance of recovering from this game. Retrieval Run is my only out left to deal with code gates. ELP. Well, the good news about ELP is that Retrieval Run bypasses ELP's effect. It doesn't affect run abilities. And more importantly, my opponent tries to score an agenda behind the Fairchild 3 thinking I can't get to it because I don't have a decoder. And I cannot run past ELP. Well, sorry about that. Dirty Laundry bypasses ELP because it's a run event, so I'm good there. Now my opponent jams another thing in the remote. Once again, I can't really be bothered. At this point, I need to find the Retrieval Run so bad. I could play the Peddler here, but again, it comes back down to awareness of my deck. I know that I need to find the Retrieval Run, otherwise I lose the game. And Peddler will not help me do that. Peddler hosting a Retrieval Run will instead cost me the game. So at this point, even though I need to draw cards, I know that Peddler is not the card that I should be holding in hand. I mean, playing on the board. In fact, I even spent my last click overdrawing to 9 cards because I needed to end my turn with a retrieval run in hand. That's how desperate I was to find it. Turns out it was the 4th last card from the stack. I drew it first click next turn, but it was too late. Yeah, I can't play retrieval run on second click. I need all 3 clicks of my turn to get past the Fairchild 3, so now I'm just setting up my board for now. I allow my opponent to get 2 ticks off an Adonis to get an extra ice on the remote, and now they're pretty rich. Now they can actually fortify Archives. Again, if my opponent is wise enough to put a code game on Archives, I have to concede. But thankfully, my opponent goes for eyes on R&D instead, so giving me a chance, and then telegraphing with an ELP. Well, before the ELP lands, I better get this retrieval run going. We'll get Yong on the table. I'm now out of mem, but thankfully because of my foresight earlier, I put medium on Progenitor so I could trash the existing medium. It's a bit clunky that way, yes. Because Progenitor is not mem strips, you need to host a virus program on it. It means that if you install your virus programs in the wrong order, if Progenitor comes late, you have to do really awkward things like this. But, well, not much I can do about that. That's now ran R&D. For real. This time with 2 sucker counters, I should be able to get through most places, and most importantly, because my opponent has not threatened with any sort of upgrade or item in the remote, I don't have to worry about CVS. CVS is right now the one thing that can blow me out big time. I'm running with only 1 click left, and I really don't want to see a CVS, which won't happen, but what I see instead is a Sherlock 2. Now I'm in a super sticky situation. I'm either forced to spend all my sucker counters on the Sherlock 2, or eat all the subroutines. I can still clear the tag with my last click, so that's fine, but the bigger problem is, if I use all my suckers, what is the last piece of ice on the remote? Is that something that's going to harm me? I need to make my way through the server completely regardless, because I need to charge up the data sucker. I can't just break 3 subroutines, spend all my sucker tokens and then jack out. That's very bad for me. So at this point, I'm actually going to suffer all the subroutines of Sherlock, pay 8 credits, and then another 2 to clear the tag. 8 for the trace and 2 for the tag. But turns out I actually made a mistake. This was not the right play. So the ice I was worried about were the likes of Fairchild 3, probably an Ichi 2, Vikram, and Ravana. All these are strength 5 or higher Bioroids that could potentially blow me out. I can only deal with strength 4 Bioroids because I only have ice cover but no sucker counters. That was a mistake because all the Fairchild 3s were rezzed. I can still suffer the subroutines of Vikram. Ichi 2.0 is not in range. My opponent only has 7 credits during the run. And Ravana was out of the equation altogether because my opponent would have rezzed it for 3 credits a lot earlier on when I started pounding R&D. Moral of the story, had I spent more time deducing what the last piece of ice could or could not have been, I should have taken my chances and not stinged on the data sucker counters. Being forced to dump so much money into the Sherlock trace meant that I vamped myself pretty quickly, and on my second run through R&D, in an attempt to win, I came up short. All I saw were double advanced assembly lines, and I brought myself down to 1 credit. This was not where I wanted to be. This was a very, very bad situation, and my opponent can easily lock me out at this point. I'm not running net ready ice in this deck. I replaced it with Faust as the option for breaking through Lotus Fields, and this is becoming a huge problem. If only I had put Data Sucker on Progenitor instead of Medium. The cards worked out this way, which was unfortunate for me, but now I have to live with it. With 2 Data Sucker counters, I can afford to run R&D once more, but this means that I won't be able to threaten any runs for the near future. So I need to get this agenda that he's representing the remote right now, and I'm trying to figure out if my opponent can keep me out of this remote. Again, the only thing I'm really worried about here is a 6 strength ice, and realistically that's only Sherlock 2.0. If there's a Sherlock 2 on server 1, I'm locked out. I'll be spending 2 data sucker counters just to prevent getting hit by the Sherlock again, and I won't be able to make it through the server successfully. Otherwise, I can easily get through the server. Credit, sure gamble, run. I need to run 3rd click because ELP drains me of a click, so I'm going to attempt it here. Run server 1. Woo! That's Gonna keep me out? Yeah, that's a thing. Fairchild 4. I'll call it Fairchild 4 from now on because otherwise it's very confusing. 8 strength, 7 with ice carver. I need 4 data cycle counters to get past it once. Ugh. Yeah, no. That's not gonna happen. So yeah, I'm pretty much locked out of server 1 from now on. Thankfully, my opponent spent 9 credits on that lofty res, so I'm actually able to run HQ here and tread water. Which means that I don't lose any data cycle counters, but I do liberate 4 credits off the Temujin, which is a big deal. Every credit counts. Now that I have the credits, I can now run R&D. It's gonna cost me 6 credits, 1 for each subroutine. And I realize I don't actually have any money left in my deck. All 3 Temujins are in the bin, all 3 daily cards are in the bin. So yeah, at this point, I need to keep hitting R&D until I win. I see 3 cards, one of which is an agenda, bringing me up to 6 points, and then I'm just going to click for credits here. For the rest of the game, I'll just be clicking for credits and running R&D. I am very aware that my opponent runs snares in his deck, which is why I am purposely keeping 3 cards in my hand at all times. None of these cards are useful to me except for the purpose of defending against net damage. So, as my opponent scores a global food to go up to 5 points, I need to rush, quickly close this game. I'm gonna see 2 fresh cards off this R&D access, and I better hope I get something good. Architect. Blue level clearance, hedge fund. Yikes. Okay, so this is the late game stage of the game where I'm just taking money and making R&D runs while my opponent is treading water, purging virus counters, trying to draw their final agenda to win the game. The purge is definitely obvious at this point. Not only does it prevent me from digging R&D further, but it also kills the data sucker counters, which means I need to find time to regenerate the sucker counters. So I'm just going to click for credits and give my opponent a couple of turns. Meanwhile, I'm counting the number of cards my opponent draws. I saw 4 cards off the top of the last R&D run. My opponent took 1 turn before purging, so they have drawn 1 card. I pass the turn over to them, where they draw the second card. I know the third card is a blue level clearance. This is a very dangerous card, in a very dangerous position. The moment they top deck the blue level, they can use it to break my R&D lock and potentially see an agenda. You would figure that my opponent has no agendas in HQ right now, hence it's not worth running. If they did, they would be jamming it so hard into the Fairchild 4 remote. No question. So, there's the blue level. They've broken R&D lock, they've seen at least 1 fresh card. Will they draw any more? Yes. My opponent draws a card. So my opponent has seen 2 fresh cards. So I know for a fact that my opponent doesn't have agendas in hand until those draws. He might now have them. At this point, I need to go for R&D where there are 5 cards in R&D. I get to see 2 of them thanks to Progenitor. Keeping the virus counter on medium, I see advanced assembly lines and a useless card. I really should have won the game by now. There are only now 4 cards left in R&D. Surely there are 4 more agendas in circulation. Standard HB agenda suite. Where could they be? Did my opponent simply draw them all last turn? That couldn't be. Because if he spent his last click drawing, he couldn't have more than 1 agenda in hand. Simple deduction. So from this I deduced that the agendas were either in R&D, or stuck at the bottom, or in archives. But can I run archives? I can't. There might be a Jackson on the table. So instead what I do here is to make a last Hail Mary R&D run and hope that my opponent doesn't have CVS on the board, in which case I'll access 3 cards. If they do, I'll only access 2 cards. And here it turns out that my opponent does not have a CVS, all they have is a Jackson instead. They have a winning agenda in the remote, and apparently there was an agenda in archives. So maybe I should have ran archives and then ran R&D. That would have been the right play, but it didn't matter in the end because I found a winning beta test. So yeah, that game really came down to the wire. There was only 1 agenda in each of the 4 servers, and I managed to hit the winning agenda thanks to the deep dig of medium. But rewinding the game, we can see that my opponent made a fair number of mistakes. I glossed over this during the game, I didn't mention it at all, but my opponent played best defense on my Street Peddler when he should have targeted my Progenitor hosting a medium instead. And also did not trash my ice cover when presented with an opportunity to do so, instead choosing to use best defense to trash my clone chip. So my opponent could have easily won otherwise, but for myself, one very important thing I learned against HB is the importance of data cycle management. Throughout the game I was struggling a lot to find data sucker counters. A lot of the times I had to click through ice that I didn't want to spend clicks on simply because I needed to charge up data sucker. Having double data suckers installed this game as opposed to single one would have helped me so much more this game. Especially without net ready ice, I am forced to rely more on data sucker. Parasite is another important card that I should also be utilizing. It synergizes with Data Sucker very well, not only because it can kill ice quickly, but it also clears ice so that you can run servers to charge up your counters more easily. Even though it is easy to get past Fairchild 3 with York, what I should have done was to drop a Parasite on the Archives or HQ Fairchild at some point, so that I could clear the way for myself to run through them to charge up suckers more easily. Finally, it seemed like most of the game was a battle between myself and my deck trying to find a York while getting hit by all the stupid snares and cobras and psychic fields. Well, of course I didn't know my opponent was playing those specific cards, so I couldn't blame myself for playing that way. And yeah, I don't think that was bad play for the most part. At the end of the day, you don't really want to install your York or to suffer the tempo hit of installing it until you really have to, which was, as I pointed out, the point where I hit the Enigma on R&D. Until then, you can afford to just click through Fairchilds whenever you face check into them, and then decide what to do later. So it just so happened that this game didn't play out the way I wanted to because of the way my opponent drew their cards and managed to hit the net damage with. But otherwise, I think I played that fine. And yeah, not using the Deja Vu on the York was probably not a mistake. Most of the time, HB won't be able to disrupt your hand, so you should be able to survive with that kind of play. It got really, really close this game, but I still managed to eke out the win at the end. Thanks for watching Happy Net Running. I'll see you around.